Good afternoon to everyone joining us. Thank you to our customers and folks on the line that took their time out today to join us on this conversation. Just as an intro for today's session, this webinar, we kind of, we're at this time frame where we're kicking off for grilling season, and there's been a lot of changes from a supply standpoint and the animal protein side, and thinking about the demand side of the picture. We kind of wanted to bring these two things together and then add in some discussion on maybe some global challenges, but also potentially tailwinds on what's going on for the animal protein space, and want to dig into the beef side of it. And I'm graciously joined by Brett Stuart with Global AgriTrends. Brett, thank you for joining us today. I follow your work, and I've known you for a little while at least, but certainly enjoy what you bring. An industry expert, and a great history of working in the animal protein space. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what you bring for us today. And I'm grateful again for folks that are joining us on the line. So Brett's going to kick it off, kind of give an overview of what's going on in the beef space, and then I'll follow it up with some things that are happening in the on the demand side from a U.S. standpoint. So as we go through this, as Paul said, encourage folks on the line just to kind of interact with us and give us your thoughts on what you're seeing. We really appreciate that. So. Paul, if you want to maybe switch it over, right before Brett goes, we put in a polling question. So, I know folks are kind of thinking about this, some impacts to the beef supply. We're going to go through the cattle space and what's going on there. But in addition to that, we've had kind of some global disruptions in terms of in trade and that side of it. Thinking about this, the first question we have for the kickoff today: how do you expect tariffs will have an impact on U.S. beef supply and therefore prices? So we got an A, B, or C here: drastic impact, mild impact, or no impact at all. So go ahead and submit if you can. We'll give it a couple minutes here to kind of think about that. But Brett, maybe I'll turn it over to you if you want to give a brief intro, and while we get some folks given their response, maybe we'll hear from you a little bit.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brian. And great question. Yeah, I'm curious to see what your thoughts are, all of you, on that. So just a brief intro to me. I grew up in a ranch family, ran cattle in Utah and Wyoming. I worked for a branded beef company. I traded cattle in Oklahoma, managed cattle on feed in the Midwest. And then I worked in Denver for both CattleFax and the U.S. Meat Export Federation. But for most of the last 20 years, I guess we're going on 20 years now, I have been running Global AgriTrends with a business partner in Denver, Richard Fritz, and with Simon Quilty in Australia, and just been able to focus entirely on global proteins. And so that's kind of the quick intro to me, but looking forward to talking here. So let's see here. There's our polling results. How do you expect tariffs will have an impact on U.S. beef supply and therefore prices? 7% thus far say mild impact or drastic impact, 7%, mild impact, 45%, no impact, 5%. What do you think of that, Brian?
Well, there we go. It is kind of interesting. We, you think about global trade flows, and I know you're going to get into this a little bit, but, we import a little bit more beef than we export, right? So certainly there's potential there if there's some import restrictions, but it's interesting to see that response and appreciate everybody that at least it's they're thinking that we might have a chance that we see that impact supply. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I think I would be with the majority there. Mild impact. We're just at such a unique space right now. It's an incredible time to be talking about the cattle and beef industry. And for 20 plus years, I've been wandering around giving talks to cattle and beef producers. I have never given a talk like this one we're going to give today, Brian. It is unique. This is an incredible time to be in the cattle and beef markets. It's just a very unique time. And so let's go ahead and just start into it here. This next slide really shows you what makes this unique. Do we got the next slide there? Yeah, here we go. There's US cattle prices. Now that's just through 2016. But you look at those, not just the prices, but look at the change from a year ago. You've got calf prices up 65 bucks from where they were a year ago right now. We've got feeders. We topped out there above $3 on feeders. We're trading fed cattle at $2.24. It is unbelievable. And I want to talk about the cattle cycle a little bit. You know, I spend a lot of my days talking about global markets, but today I think the focus right here is on the US, and I'll talk a little bit about how it plays into the global markets. But the next slide you can see, this is a US beef herd chart, and I love USDA data. You can complain about USDA data, but go find any other country in the world that has a cattle inventory to 1920. Nobody does. What's interesting about this chart, you look and go, the cattle cycle is predictable. I analyze commodities all over the world every week. I have never found a cycle this predictable. And you look at that cycle, there's 100 years of data. And I talk about the cattle cycle, and I've always got a few guys that'll say, hey, it's different this time. Land is too expensive, interest rates are too high, the average age of producers too high, we're just not going to expand. And I go, I got 100 years of data that tells me the cattle cycle will turn again. And it's a matter of finding that relative price to make it happen. So let's go on to the next slide. This is an unusual cattle and beef rally. Cattle are record high, beef's near record high. It's hugely significant and unique. And if you look at the next slide, here's what I want you to understand. This rally has been demand driven. Those blue bars are per capita supplies. The green line is the retail beef price. Look at the last 6 years. Well, 5 years, 25 is forecasted. We have had virtually the same amount of beef. Everyone in America for 5 years, we've had stable supplies. And what have prices done? Straight up. And the only economic definition of that is demand. Look back at the last cycle there, 2005 to 2015. Sure, we had rising retail prices, but per cap supplies plummeted. That is a typical economic response. Supplies go down, prices go up. Why this is so significant, these wild prices we're in today are coming with stable supplies. Now that is going to change. If you look at the next chart, I went ahead and forecasted 26, 27. We've cut 10% of the herd, right? We are going to have a reduction in beef supply in the US, and it's probably come in the next 2 years pretty quickly. So when we drop supplies, the question is, can beef prices go higher? And this is the endless debate. There's no way. Consumers just cannot pay more than they're paying. I kind of agree with that, but unless we have hit a glass ceiling that we don't know existed, it is really hard to expect prices to stabilize when we're going to cut 4 pounds off the per cap supplies the next 2 years. And so this rally is incredible. So how have we done it? Well, here's one of the ways we've done it. Carcass weights, long-term average, 5 pounds a year on carcass weights. Last year, 21 pounds. This year, we're up 21 pounds again. And so these higher weights have masked that herd reduction. Now, this next slide, you'll see here what's going on with the interplay between beef cows and production. Typically, a cycle, you reduce the beef herd and production follows. Because of the drought from 2020 to 2024, we reduced the cow herd. Beef production didn't drop, not much anyway. Now that is going to change very soon because we simply don't have the cows. The prices are screaming, make more beef, make more heifers, give us more. And so we're in a spot here where the next 2 years, we're going to see that production fall. Falling production is going to push price support. And so as high as prices are, what I'm telling you, this is unique. And I said, I've never given a presentation like this. This is about as optimistic of a beef presentation as I can give. Next slide. So here's the big question. Is that rebuild underway? Here you can see there's cow slaughter. The drought pushed cattle through the system. That's how we kept the beef supply big through the drought. But that reduced cow slaughter has also sent 90% lean beef prices to record highs. 90% lean, that's the lean grindy beef. That's the majority of what we import. We have record high 90 prices. We have record high imports. We are a giant vacuum right now on the global markets. And even a 10% tariff, and you add on to Brazil, 10 plus 26, they're at 36%. You wait and see the April trade data. I am predicting we will see record high beef imports from Brazil in April at 36% tariffs. So to the question, do tariffs have an effect? Maybe a mild effect, but when we have these kind of beef prices, we are the highest bidder on earth, and we're just pulling more and more beef to try to satisfy these high prices and honestly the strong demand.
We saw that last year too, Brett, right? It was pretty strong imports from Brazil to kind of offset some of the fattier trim that we have available and bring in some of the lean to mix it with these strong prices we're seeing. That all makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Just another thought here too, Brian. So there's a comment in here about drought, weather patterns. Refers to a speaker that shared the thoughts that there could be a major drought in 2026. I haven't heard that, but we have a consulting meteorologist that does long-term ag weather forecasting, and his recent update shows some pretty dry conditions over the summer in 2025, right in the Central Plains, right on the corn crop. And drought can prolong this. We know that. If things turn drier than expected, we're going to keep pushing heifers into feedlots and cows through the slaughter plant. But the challenge is this herd is so tight now, there's not a lot left to give. And so I think it would take a pretty extreme drought to change it. But I hadn't seen that 2026 expectation. But there are some new forecasts coming out that really call into question 2025. All right, over to this. So these are the indicators to watch. Is the rebuild occurring? This is the female ratio, the percent of females in total slaughter. And there you can see that blue line's a 21-month moving average. 47.5 is your average. Above that, you're over slaughtering. Below that, you're under slaughtering and rebuilding. And so I look at that and say, well, we're not quite there yet, but look at the angle. And again, that's a 21-month moving average. So I think that thing's going to drop. I think by the end of the year, we're going to be pushing down into 47. Next year, we're going to drop down below, and that will signal a rebuild. And so that's a key indicator to watch, is how much of the slaughter is cows and heifers. And again, we've topped out. I think we've turned the corner, moving the other way. Another key indicator is the heifer percent of cattle on feed. And this comes out quarterly in the cattle on feed data. Now, timing this rebuild is tricky. You look at this slide and you can see, right, the average is 37%. When there are more heifers on feed, that tells you we're liquidating. And then look what happens when those calf price highs come in. We start holding heifers, breeding heifers. The heifer percent on feed plummets. So this is a really good indicator. Now, April 1st, it was 37.6. However, something significant has changed in the last 3 years that make this data a little bit confusing. The next slide you can see, it's beef on dairy. And I'm not going to walk through this all, but it's common sense, right? In a conventional dairy system, before beef on dairy, out of 100 cows, you had, or 100 calving cows, you had 50 steers, 50 heifers. Well, beef on dairy just makes more heifers because you got your sexed semen 20 replacement heifers and the rest are 50-50. So you got to realize beef on dairy increases the number of heifers in the system. So if we're looking at those indicators, we got to adjust for that. Now, this next slide you can see here, this is CoBank's report. Came out, what, 2 months ago, Brian? Ish?
Yeah, about that. We did a kind of a deep dive into thinking of the mix between what dairy contributions are to the beef system.
Yeah. Super helpful. If you haven't seen that report, go find it, because what this shows me as I go through my numbers, it says technically we have 3.3% more heifers as a percent of our cattle on feed than we would have back before the beef on dairy rush. And so now go back to this next slide and we look at that and say the cattle on feed that are heifers are 37.6, but with 3% more due to beef on dairy, that slide is probably closer to 34.6. And if that's the case, this waved the red flag, right? The rebuild is underway. I truly believe our rebuild is happening right as we speak. And if you think about most fall calving cows, when are those heifers bred? They're bred right now. And so we're going to find out how many of those heifers got bred. It won't be till we get the July cattle on feed quarterly data. But right now is when the heifers are being bred. How many heifers you think are being bred? Let's look at the next slide. This is the average bred heifer price less a feeder heifer price. Look at the 2014-15. That sent the signal when those calf prices got high, the market said, make more heifers. We made more heifers very quickly and turned the cycle. Look at what the market's doing today. The market is screaming for bred heifers. $1,200 a head more for a bred heifer than a feeder heifer. These are just US average numbers. And so the market is begging for heifers, and we're going to respond. I think when we see that November or that July cattle on feed report, we're going to see a lot of heifers were bred. But I know a lot of guys that are chasing breeding heifers right now. Go look at the markets. Go see what those good breeding heifers are bringing right now. I think the rebuild is upon us here. So where are we headed? If you look at the relationship between the beef cow herd and the calf price, this is a 500-pound calf price. Look at those cattle cycles. So when the cattle inventory bottoms, the bottom dead center of that cycle, the next year is usually the high in the calf price. 04, 05, inventory bottoms, the next year's the calf price high. 14, 15, same story. So that tells us what? Now this chart is actually through 2025. It isn't on the axis because it's every other year. So 2025, you can see if we get that January number and 2026 shows a little uptick from some of these bred heifers, that tells me the high in the calf price will probably be 2025. And I say they're average 28 bucks a hundredweight higher. I think it'll actually be a little higher than that when we see the US average for 2025. And again, this is a US average price. We've got bids coming in out here. I know some order buyers that have been given the red flag to pay $4, $4.10, $4.15 for every 5-weight heifer they can book this fall. And so it's there, right? It's pretty shocking, Brian, to see these kind of price levels. All right. Go ahead, Brian.
There's a question here thinking about carcass weights. What could we see weights go to? Are we kind of hitting the peak of where they'll be from an acceptable standpoint, or we think we continue to? It's amazing they continue to put more weight on the animals.
Yeah, and that's a market screaming for more beef. That's the market saying make more. And so if you're a beef packer in the US right now, one, you are not making money, and you make money by selling pounds of beef, and there's less cattle. You want to sell more pounds of beef. You lift all the discounts on heavyweights and say, make them bigger. Now, there is a limit. There's a physical limit in the plants. I've heard of plants that are chiseling the cement floor out so they can drop it to move longer carcasses across. They can't lift the rail. They move the floor. We're not there yet. Carcasses are going to continue to grow. I think we're going to continue to see the market incentive is still there to make them bigger, and I think we continue to do that. So this is some data from John Nalivka. You guys probably know of John Nalivka, Sterling Marketing. He's in Drovers every month. Great analyst. Love John. I'm in Idaho. He's out here in Oregon. We're kind of neighbors out here. But I use his data because I know that there is no such thing as an average cow-calf margin in America. I've tried to do it for 20 years. Nothing's average, what costs are in, what are out. But John does a good job of just showing a relative index. You kind of got to look at that as an index. But a couple points here. Look at the forecasts there are 24 and 25. We are seeing astronomical profits in this industry. And again, they're demand driven, because we haven't cut the supplies significantly yet. The other point here, and I talked to some of these younger guys that are out there trying to buy cows and breed cows and buy land and get big quick. And I go, look at John's chart here. The long-term average, if you go back before 2014, 15, you exclude those and go back to 2021, the average is 80 bucks a head. We can't forget that. The average is 80 bucks a head. And these cycles always cycle, but it is astronomical what we're seeing today.
Yeah, I think that, you talked earlier about kind of the average age of the cattle producer. They remember that it's $80 a head, right? Mm-hmm. 57 or 58 years old, something like that. So.
Yeah. The younger guys have a lot more enthusiasm, but this next slide, my first point here, markets are like airplanes. And what I mean by that, we haven't left one up there yet. There's no planes that just never quit flying. They all land. And this will turn. And you go out into 27, 28, somewhere out here, we're going to turn this cycle. And so you got to keep that in the back of your mind in perspective with all this enthusiasm. This liquidation has been extended by drought. How fast can we rebuild? One, we don't have as many heifers as we had in 14-15. We've whittled the herd down. I don't think this is going to be a flash in the pan like 14-15 was. I think it's going to be sustained because really 14-15 was supply driven. We're not into the supply driven cycle yet. And so I think we've got some really high prices here, 26, 27, and then we'll see where we land. But weather's always in the back of your mind on this. But again, we do have higher interest rates. We have higher land costs. The age of producer is always a challenge, but I've watched that for 20 years. And the joke I remember out in Wyoming years ago, the average cattle rancher was like 65 years old. And the joke was the 90-year-olds are selling out to the 70-year-olds. So somehow this thing continues. And I've watched generational change in the valley where I grew up, and it adjusts. The cattle still graze and things move on. So just one kind of final thought here, and I know Brian's got some more data on this, but here's the question. Are Americans done with expensive beef? I go into my grocery store in Preston, Idaho, and ribeyes are $18 a pound. That's pretty shocking. I walk 20 feet down the meat case and I'm looking at lobster tail for 18 bucks a pound. We're there, right? We are the consummate luxury item. But you look at that chart and you go, not yet, because what did I tell you? Supplies are going to be tighter next year. And as shocking as these prices are, we're just not there yet. So Brian, I'm just going to wrap up with a couple other factors here, summarize, and then turn it over to you. Things we haven't gotten to talk about here. Tariffs, trade, in China. You got to remember, we just lost access to our number 3 market. China, we're out. And it isn't tariffs, it's cancellation of registrations. We're out. Even if we get a tariff deal, we can't ship to China. Our companies are deregistered. But will there be a phase 2? If you pick through the news release of the last China-US meeting, they talked about purchase commitments. That's what happened the last time around, and within 3 years, we shipped the biggest ag exports in history to China on the heels of the phase 1 agreement. Don't write off China yet. Global cattle cycles in sync. Everything I've told you here is crazy. In 20 years, I've never seen it, but Australia, Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina have all been in big liquidations. They're all expected to be in rebuild next year. Rebuild tightens the supply. So this isn't a US situation. This is a global phenomenon. We're seeing rain in Queensland and Australia, plenty of rain. They're getting ready into restocking, but this isn't just tight US supplies, it's tight global supplies. We will see the global beef index at new record highs probably within 3 to 6 months. Other news, the Mexican screwworm findings, that jeopardizes about 1.4 million feeder cattle from Mexico. We're probably already down 500,000 head just from the disruption over the winter. They found another case. What is the outlook? My guess is this is not good. The system has broken that's controlled screwworm in Central America, and I think it's going to be an ongoing problem. So just to summarize my thoughts, and I'll turn it over to Brian, record prices thus far have been demand driven. Soon they will be supply driven, higher prices ahead. This cattle cycle is alive and well. We are likely to see those price highs in 2026. Remember, markets are like airplanes. Global fundamentals are supported. We've got these global cattle cycles in sync. And so with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up, Brian.
All right, thanks, Brett. There's a lot to think about there. I'm always trying to find my way through what's going on the supply side, so I appreciate that. I know you've got plenty more to offer us there, and maybe we'll get some questions here at the end that kind of lead us into some more thoughts on what's going on from that side of the table. But we're not necessarily switching gears here, but I wanted to kind of continue on the conversation Brett started about thinking about the demand side of it. As mentioned, we're kicking off the grilling season here, and I just talked to my wife. She was asking, what should I buy at the store here to get ready for the big Memorial Day weekend, and there's probably going to be a little bit of everything on the menu, but we're expecting some higher beef prices there. So kind of three points I wanted to get to here. Brett talked about where we're at from a supply standpoint, and a lot of that limited by the cattle availability. When we think about what's going on the consumer side, they learned how to cook in 2021. A lot of this, COVID related, folks kind of trying to bring that restaurant experience into their home. And I think that's, a learned experience that they not only enjoyed cooking and using those new pellet grills that they bought in the pandemic, but also learn that they can get a really high quality beef item at the grocery store, which they, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you either had to go to a really high end restaurant or, hopefully you found something at your local butcher that, met those same expectations. So next slide, Paul. Thinking about the overall animal protein space, we've seen some pretty strong growth in overall supply over the last 10 years. The bulk of this in terms of what the U.S. per capita meat consumption has been absorbed in the chicken space. You see here almost 19 pounds of additional chicken consumed by the U.S. Consumers on an annualized basis. Beef and pork have also seen that growth as well. Turkey, some struggles there in terms of kind of helping the consumer realize that's a year-round good that they can have. But overall, you think back 10 years ago, turkey on the table really saw some strength for being a lean protein, and so that may have been the glory days, but hopefully overall, as we're navigating through tighter beef supplies, the consumer is probably going to be starting to think about, what else can be on the plate. So let's see here. So next slide, Paul. As we think about where we started the year, I was kind of thinking, well, where are prices at from a producer standpoint, and kind of pulled this chart gathering where February prices were compared with a year ago. So this blue bar is thinking about price change versus 2024 on feeder cattle, fed cattle, hogs, and I used a composite for the chicken price. As you can see there, from a wholesale standpoint, we had roughly a 5% change in chicken prices year over year, and you were up, roughly 4.5% versus the 5-year average. So this I was trying to figure out, where are we at when we're thinking about the procurement side and preparing for the grilling season, basically March, April, May timeframe, and really these higher prices was a difficult situation for procurement to think about what they were going to be featuring this year, specifically thinking about tight cattle supplies and what that means. But overall, from a pricing environment, some difficult decisions in terms of forward purchasing strategy and that sort of thing. As we look at the next slide, we're thinking about overall prices. And this is just comparing food at home versus food away from home. So the CPI, this is the actual price. And indexing that back to 2000, these things were about even with each other. But over the years we've seen a departure. And while food at home really kind of flattened out from 2015 to 2020, there wasn't a whole lot of inflation there. I saw that increase through the pandemic, and it's starting to flatten out again. Well, on the other side of the equation, as food away from home continues to see those prices move higher. And as a result, if we go to the next slide, we're thinking about what those purchases are in terms of a percentage of the overall disposable income. While those prices are moving higher, still a relatively small portion of overall disposable income for the consumer. So this kind of goes back to Brett's comments of thinking about, well, what does it hold in terms of the portion of the budget for U.S. consumers? Relatively low in the grand scheme of things, and a big part of that is that we've seen that disposable household income continue to rise. So they may be spending more money on other things like that higher car payment or housing and services and these sort of things. But overall, the food portion of the budget, while it's higher, still relatively small portion. So I think this is one of those key elements that when we think about the demand side of the equation, it's important to keep that perspective, especially when you look back to like 2050 when that was, for overall total food was about 20% of the budget to somewhat, well below that today. So, and as we think about that, maybe more of a little bit of a narrower picture to near term, if we think back to that 2021 timeframe, the availability of folks going out to restaurants was really limited by social distancing measures and that sort of thing. So we saw the consumer really kind of gravitate towards more prepared meals in their kitchens and that sort of thing. And then in 2022, we saw this quote unquote revenge spending that kind of came back, and it hit the goods in a lot of different ways, but food away from home spending really did increase, whereas food at home kind of decreased during that time frame. I was curious last year when we would start to see this switch back where inflation would really kind of work its way into that food away from home spending. And at least through the tail end of 2024, it does appear that may have been the case where folks are thinking about preparing their meals at home again more than away from home. And so, overall, we talk about the animal protein space as having really strong demand. On the beef side of the equation, this is, relative price relative to overall availability and disappearance for beef. We're hitting all-time records for beef demand. Now it kind of worked its way downwards a little bit in 2023, but you can see this index at 128 is still pretty strong. I do anticipate we might see a little bit of that pullback from the consumer this year, maybe thinking those higher prices are a little bit too high, but typically what we're seeing is what we saw in the last chart, where folks are thinking more about where they're purchasing their food, not necessarily trading in between the category. Brett, I don't know if that's kind of your experience as well, but I continue to kind of hear that, from the economists I talk to as well.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, Brian. I just keep hearing people scream, recession, recession, food inflation. It's so painful. And I watch that food away from home just continue to outpace the food at home. And I go, where is the money coming from? 3 years ago, if I'd seen these levels, I would have said, we're stalled out. We can't push it. And yet we do. And I don't know if some of this is generational. I know my kids, I've got kids in college right now on thin budgets, and it's shocking to me how much they eat out, but they will eat out and go without other things so they can eat out. And I'm always doing the math going, hey, if you buy this and make it at home, and they're like, yeah, whatever, I'm buying my $4 soda at the drive-through thing or whatever. But I don't know. I feel like it might be a little bit generational, and just that we're in a little bit of a different world than what I remember.
Yeah, I've been in a couple of meetings this week where we're talking about, just where that demand is coming from, and a lot of it, that consumer preference continues to kind of work its way into the equation, that folks are thinking about their diets in a different way than they were 20 years ago, and a lot of that is inclusive of more protein in there. So we've got another polling question. Still trying to get kind of your thoughts on the line of what we're working with this year. We saw the chart on volume, and roughly 19 pounds of additional chicken over the last 20 years. It's been the king of volume for consumers. But in terms of overall dollar sales, curious the thoughts on overall who's the king there, and we've got just looking at the top three proteins, so chicken, beef, and pork.
While we wait here, Brian,
think about that.
On that poll, just a thought I've had, and I've looked at the data. The rule of thumb is when the market is screaming make more beef, it takes about 3.5 years, because you got to hold a heifer to breed in 25, to breed in 26, to calve in 27, to make more beef somewhere in 28. For chicken, it's 90 days. If the market says make more chicken, 90 days, here's more chicken. For pork, it's around 10 months. And I think one of the factors when we look at the interplay between chicken, beef, and pork is every time we go through a massive cattle cycle, we tighten supplies, we run the prices through the roof, and chicken market share grows. and we never get it back. You know, chicken, I think that's been the rise of chicken, is they're so nimble and can adapt. I think as we look at 2025, this will be the year of chicken sandwiches, chicken tenders, chicken nuggets. You will see chicken everywhere because those QSRs, quick serve restaurants, cannot make money selling hamburgers this year. And so you look at, Wendy's has the big nugget feature. McDonald's rolled out a chicken Big Mac. We're just going to see a lot of chicken this year. And that's one of the factors, is they just don't have that cycle, and they're able to take full advantage on pricing.
Yeah, it's a good point. It kind of caught me by surprise in the market here. The breast meat market and chicken side has just skyrocketed over the last 60 days. And I think a lot of that, what we kind of started this discussion thinking about the procurement efforts, may have been kind of got behind a little bit on what they were going to be featuring, and the food service entities were already kind of thinking, well, we're going to have to do more chicken this year to kind of supplement that. And you talk about your quick serve format. I think back Wendy's 20 years ago, it was largely burgers on the menu, but today I think they've got more chicken items than they do, and they're known as a burger joint, right? So
right.
It's interesting. We've got the polling response back here. Overwhelmingly beef, the king of dollar sales at the retail format. Appreciate all your response on that, and that kind of leads us into this chart that I was on a panel with Randy Block from CattleFax at the meat conference this year. And, not necessarily surprising, but one of those charts that just kind of makes you tilt your head a little bit. And interesting that beef has gained 9% market share in spending at retail since 1998. And I know, one of his comments is thinking about, giving credit to the cattle producer here and recognizing some issues with the beef quality that we had in the 70s and 80s, and kind of really making a big effort to change that to provide a really high quality item. And boy, it shows up at the meat case, then when you get a high quality item and folks gravitate towards it, look at this, and it just shows the efforts there.
Yeah.
And so I know you highlighted this chart as well, Brett, thinking about the retail prices, and I indexed back to 2019 in terms of looking at really just some specific items from the Consumer Price Index. So these are, survey results from the counter. So ground beef, chicken breast, pork chop, and beef steak. These are all kind of trying to navigate to get the consumer dollar at the retail format. And I would say the blue line for ground beef has kind of continued to work its way higher over the years. Chicken saw a pretty strong run up from 2021 to 2023, and then it's come down since then, actually. So we're closer to that 2019 price on chicken than we were 2-3 years ago, whereas pork has been relatively flat. So we're still kind of seeing those increases and coming across at the retail format.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the other thing I was thinking about is where are folks spending their dollars from a retail standpoint. Stumbled across this data, from USDA, where they're looking at meat or food expenditures and where they're at. So, the red line looking at your traditional kind of grocery store format has kind of steadily been decreasing as a percent over overall sales over the years. And that's looking back to the mid-1990s. And, I've kind of had this question out there of what is the impact of kind of this warehouse club format, in the big supermarkets and folks, spending their dollars at Costco or Sam's on things like meat versus the grocery store. And overall, that market share has grown over time. And I think, part of this from the meat counter standpoint is quality and consistency are pretty strong in terms of the list of consumer attributes for meat and other things as well. And they know they can get it from these formats. But still, your traditional grocery store format still holding about 40% market share or 45% market share. So relatively strong portion there overall.
I was just going to mention here, Brian. So just so you guys are aware, we've got some questions coming in, but they're different topics, but don't jump off. We're going to have time. We'll go ahead and get through questions and comments. So hang with us on this.
Yeah, I appreciate you pointing that. It's good to have some interaction here, and we'll just hang tight for a little bit, and I'll work through the rest of this. So this is some survey result data from Glenn Tonser, and I frequently am kind of either looking at this or pointing to it when I'm out presenting. And you know, I think about, well, what are consumers looking for in their meat when they're making that purchasing decision. Overwhelmingly, I would say these top 5 items in terms of preference really stick around the top of the list. So taste, freshness, price, safety, and nutrition really are kind of those top attributes that folks are looking for when they're choosing meat. And you know, what's usually kind of towards the bottom are thinking about things like animal welfare and environmental impact. And my takeaway on this is those tangible things that folks are looking for. That's what's kind of driving the purchasing, but that doesn't mean the other things aren't important. It's just that I think the consumer, generally speaking, expects that the producer is being responsible in terms of those things like animal welfare and environmental impact. Notably here, I did notice I just kind of updated my data from you know, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, and safety and nutrition have actually flipped here in terms of order of importance. I'm not sure if this is MAHA movement or, you know, folks in general kind of see these. They're pretty similar in terms of attributes, but I do think that's maybe just something to note to keep kind of looking at in terms of what folks are what's driving their purchase behavior.
It's important to know, Brian, it is taste. And taste is number one. And there's a comment, I won't quote who it's from, but there's a comment here on the chats to us that someone described the chicken strips at McDonald's as tasting like an octopus's kneecap. I don't know how to take that. I'm not sure what an octopus kneecap tastes like, but I think there's a reason that you've seen beef ribeyes at $18. It's just,
yeah,
people pay for taste.
They can demand that premium, right? And they come
Right.
back for it, the quality and consistency every time. And they may not if it tastes like an octopus kneecap. I haven't heard that one, but I'll put it in the back pocket. All right. And kind of, you know, this is one of my last slides here. You know, I think about the beef space and just how amazing it is that we as U.S. consumers have access to such high quality beef versus where we were 20 years ago. And you can see that the dark blue there is the amount of prime beef production in the U.S., and we're somewhere around 2 billion pounds. And my understanding here, since the beginning of the year, we've actually seen the amount of prime as a percentage of total beef production is actually higher than what the select is in 2025, which, you know, again, amazing, just kind of boosting the ability to, you know, to have a premium. So, you know, we're kind of asking, like, how high can beef prices go? Well, if you produce a really strong, high quality item and enough of it, you know, it deserves every dollar that's out there. And not only that, but it's being provided to the consumer in different ways. So this picture here is of a dry ager in actually a grocery store format. And I've seen a couple of these out there. I haven't specifically tried it yet, but you know, just thinking about that, back 20 years ago, you know, you couldn't get dry aged beef even at your local butcher, let alone in a grocery store format, and it's available to the consumer. Now, notably, I think this picture is a little old because it's showing somewhere around $25 a pound for dry aged ribeye, which would be, I think we've got to be somewhere north of that today. Wow. So we'll wrap it up here on my thoughts, really just kind of thinking, you know, this protein demand, I think it continues to kind of exceed our expectations from an analyst standpoint, and we're, you know, we're incredibly grateful for that, but it keeps us kind of thinking about what's beyond, what's the next step, and here as we get through the summer, it seems like consumers, you know, while they're kind of adjusting their purchasing strategy, beef continues to remain in the cart. They may be thinking twice about, from a food service standpoint, how they're going to, you know, how they're going to purchase there. But overall, we know that, like you said, the taste, quality, and convenience, those all kind of remain at the top of the list of priorities for the consumer. So,
with that, Brian, I'm going to throw out one question here, and I've had this question a lot. You talk about these prices, and we look at those relative price levels, and the question comes up: is this going to spur demand for alt protein, for plant-based meat, Beyond Meat, those kind of companies? And you look at the retail data. We went through this on our webcast last week for our clients. We went through the retail data, and that alt plant-based meat year over year volume and sales is still down double digits. It is cratering, and whatever it is, and I guess it's taste, right? I don't know, but I don't see it. I don't see these high beef prices helping those alternative meats. I looked at Beyond Meat stock the other day. Beyond Meat was $2.39 a share, was their high in 2019. 3-4 days ago, it was $2.70. And so, yeah, I don't see the plant-based getting much of a kick out of this.
Yeah, and I don't have a whole lot to add to that, and other than thinking about, I'm not sure folks are really necessarily thinking about these items competing at the meat case anymore. They once were, but this is, they may say alternative protein, but I think it's just another offering for the consumer at this point, not necessarily a replacement. So we'll see if that has space to grow. But when you look at how chicken's grown, and they, like you said, they can kind of turn on a dime in the broiler industry and crank those hatchings higher and work with it. If the consumer tells them they need more chicken, they'll boost output. So we'll see. It's been an interesting one to watch. Last 7, 8, 9 years of what's going on there in terms of disruption, and really kind of slowed down here the last couple of years.
Yeah. One other question, shifting gears a little bit. So a question about the impact of the recent US-UK trade agreement for beef and protein markets. And the Trump administration announced, 2 weeks ago, we've got a deal with the UK. We're going to do this trade agreement. Honestly, for beef, pork, and poultry, everything I've seen is quite disappointing. And Europe, it started with Europe. The UK was part of Europe, then they broke off. But the European UK food laws are written and designed to keep US protein out of their markets, whether it's hormones in beef, whether it's chlorinated rinsed poultry rinsed with chlorinated water. They have all these, just a web of things designed to prevent us from exporting. And it would be a fantastic market. I would love to see us get access. I think it'd be great for beef, pork, and poultry to get into the UK. But thus far, all I saw was a 13,000 ton quota each way for US beef and UK beef coming the opposite ways. That doesn't do anything when we have to comply with the sanitary requirements of the UK. And so I don't know where that goes. I know Secretary Rollins was in the UK last week, and she came back and said this is going to be a big deal for agriculture. But I've yet to hear anything positive that we could really dismantle the regulations that have been very effective at keeping us out.
Yeah, it's very interesting to think about the trade deals and kind of really what's to come out of that. That was kind of the first big trade deal kind of that the administration got done, right? So I'll kind of comment your comment earlier on, are we going to see a phase 2 trade deal out of China? And I'm actually here at the U.S. Meat Export Federation meeting, and Dr. John Newton asked that question to the audience today and saw hands go up. And underwhelmingly, not really a whole lot of certainty there around if that'll occur, but he seemed pretty confident that it's going to happen at some point, and maybe we're kind of working towards it. So we'll see that. That's another one that has potential to be somewhat of a disruptor for this space, and I would think a positive one in terms of overall disappearance. So. Yeah.
Another one. Do you envision a steep drop in consumer demand coming with already high prices, tightening of the supply on the horizon? And I'm assuming that's with beef. And yeah, I think we will see demand drop. Demand is that relationship between supply, demand, and price. And we're at the euphoric phase of the cycle. And you fast forward 3 or 4 years after these just oppressive price hikes, and all of a sudden we put a bunch more beef on the market. The supply impact pulls it lower. But I think there is a demand impact. Usually we correct, but I think that demand is a little cyclical. You saw beef demand drop from 2015 to 2016 during that cattle cycle, and then it was up again. But I'm not expecting a collapse, but I think you will see a little bit of a drop in beef demand, probably into 2026 based on those prices. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Brian.
Well, I'm kind of wondering, I was looking at some of the wholesale values for, like 109E, looking at the ribeye space, and it's a pretty strong market right now, historically strong. And in terms of passing that along to the consumer, it's going to be difficult. But I kind of wonder if, from a ground beef standpoint, folks don't always think about, 50% of beef is consumed in ground form. What's the opportunity there? And, maybe I think you kind of started on this, but thinking about the trade relationship and the impact that would have on ground beef availability and the demand side of it, I think there's potential there that if we look at from a very basic standpoint, McDonald's or QSR format, if they're putting more chicken into the feature activity or an LTO or something like that, that can show up from a demand standpoint as well, I would think. So,
yeah. Here's another question on trade. Any comments on the HPAI outbreak in Brazil and how that may impact protein? So you probably saw in the news this week that Brazil reported a case of high-path avian influenza on a commercial poultry farm. That is a first. That's a first ever. Now, they've found HPAI in waterfowl, but this is the first commercial outbreak. And so pretty big deal. Brazil is more than a third of global poultry trade. They are the biggest suppliers to the biggest markets, $10 billion a year in poultry exports out of Brazil. And you look at the bans that are adding up. China banned Brazil. They put a duration on it, said, we'll watch and see. But they're out of China now. That's a big market for them. There's been some bans imposed regionally by Japan and others. Big uncertainty here around poultry trade. We're probably going to see a little more pull on poultry into some of those markets. But Brazil's not out of the woods. And the problem with HPAI, what are the odds they never find another case? Yeah, zero, right? They're going to find more cases. And so it definitely throws a big wrench into the global poultry markets, that HPAI in Brazil.
Yeah, interestingly, I know you probably looked at this as well, but thinking about the region that it was found in commercial poultry, I think actually China had already put a ban in place for poultry coming out of that region. I can't remember the specifics around that, but then, they're not instituting a regionalization effect for Brazil, although they have, with the U.S. So that's kind of interesting to think about. Well, what's the duration? And like you said, if that's a third of poultry exports in the world, it will be interesting to see how this develops. And overall, the high-path AI situation, continue to hope that there's a solution here that maybe we're not seeing that really helps out markets get the protein that they need.
Yeah. Well, let me just share just a final thought or two, and then I'll let Brian close here. Today we're talking about the global and U.S. beef markets, outlook, cattle. Just kind of the nutshell version. We're not in uncharted water, but we're in some pretty extreme water. And that's really good for some people selling cattle, and it's really tough if you're trying to trade beef right now, or if you're a processor. And I guess the good news, bad news of the cattle cycle is, if you like the spot you're in, remember it's temporary. And if you don't like the spot you're in right now, remember it's temporary. But it is pretty extreme, and I feel like it's probably going to get a little more extreme into 2022 as we move forward.
Yeah, I'll close it out. I appreciate your thoughts on that as well. And Brett, thank you for all you've shared today. This is always really insightful. For the folks that joined us, thank you for joining us. Thank you to our customers and folks that are in the agricultural space as well in general. You can check out CoBank.com for the materials that the Knowledge Exchange puts out, and certainly Global AgriTrends. If you're not familiar with Brett, hopefully you heard about it today, and great insight, and certainly I appreciate the access to the materials you have. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great day and a great Memorial Day weekend, and enjoy that kickoff to grilling season.